Welcome back to the Deep End. Today, we are tackling a figure who is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration at all, a complete living paradox in the history books.
That's a perfect way to put it, a paradox.
We're talking about a man who is, well, he's arguably the most famous Muslim ruler in all of Western history. He was literally the boogeyman for medieval Europe.
Oh, absolutely. The stories are incredible. I mean, mothers in France and England would actually threaten their misbehaving children with his name.
Right. If you don't eat your vegetables, he'll come and get you. And yet, by the end of his life, this very same man ends up being revered by his sworn enemies as the ultimate paragon of chivalry.
It's a fascinating contradiction, isn't it? I mean, you have Dante Alighieri, who is writing the Divine Comedy, a deeply, deeply Christian work rooted in the theology of that era.
The foundational text.
Exactly. And he places this Muslim sultan in limbo. Now, limbo wasn't heaven, of course, but it was the place he reserved for the virtuous pagans, people like Plato and Socrates. He just couldn't want himself to put him in hell.
He respected him too much.
He respected him too much. Then you jump forward a few centuries to Victorian England, and you've got Sir Walter Scott writing him as this romantic, noble hero. And yet, and this is the core of the paradox, his entire mission in life, the singular goal that drove him every single day, was the unification of the Islamic world to defeat the very people who were, in a way, writing these love letters to his character.
It's almost like if during the height of the Cold War, the United States had decided that a top Soviet premier was the ultimate gentleman and started, writing fan fiction about him.
That's a great analogy. It really is that strange. The cognitive dissonance in the Western historical record about him is just profound.
We were talking, of course, about the Sultan who vanquished the Crusaders. We were doing a deep dive into the life, the legend, and the very surprising reality of Salahuddin Ayyubi.
Or, as he's more commonly known in the West, Saladin.
Saladin. And even that name, as we get started, is a bit of a simplification, right? It's not actually his name.
Not at all. It's a Latin corruption. It's what happens when a French or English knight tries to pronounce these beautiful, multi-syllable Arabic honorifics.
All right, let's unpack that name first, because I was digging into the source material. We're looking at Jonathan Phillips' work and the analysis by Dr. Ali Salabi, and his actual full name and title. It's a mouthful, but every single part of it tells a story. It's Al-Malik al-Nasir Salahuddin Yusuf ibn Ayyub.
Precisely. And if we just break that down, it basically gives you his resume before we even start his life story.
Okay, so let's do it. Al-Malik al-Nasir.
That's a title, not a name. It means the king who supports or the king who aids. So right away, it frames his rule not as, domination, but as service, as support.
And then the famous part, Salah al-Din.
Right. An honorific. It means the righteousness of the faith or the goodness of the faith. This was the title he earned.
And that's where we get Saladin. It's just the Western tongue trying to wrap itself around Salah al-Din.
Correct. It's exactly the same thing that happened to his brother. His brother's honorific was Saif al-Din, which means sword of the faith.
Another great title.
A fantastic title. And the Western chroniclers corrupted that into Safaddin.
So it's a pattern. But the personal name in there is the part that I think most people miss, and it feels so crucial. Yusuf ibn Ayyub.
That translates to Joseph, son of Job.
Joseph, son of Job. I mean, that feels heavy with symbolism. You've got these major Quranic and biblical prophets. Joseph, the great administrator who saved Egypt from famine through his wisdom.
And Job, the universal symbol of patience through immense suffering.
It's like his whole life story was written into his name.
And as we're going to see today, he really needed the qualities of both. He needed that administrative brilliance of a Joseph to manage the absolute chaos of Egypt, which was the breadbasket of the entire region, and he absolutely 100% needed the patience of Job to deal with the fractured, infighting politics of his own side.
That's a really important point, because contrary to what you see in the movies, he didn't just walk in and command a unified army.
Not even close. He spent decades just herding cats. He probably spent more time and energy managing his own coalition than he did actually fighting the Crusaders.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We really want to move past the Hollywood caricature. We've all seen the movies. Usually it's Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven, where he's portrayed as this, Noble, wise, soft-spoken general who speaks in these perfect cryptic riddles.
A philosophical warrior king.
Exactly. And while there are elements of truth to that, we want to understand the intellectual formation of the man. We want to look at his Sunni revival project, his philosophy of leadership, which was built on some really radical ideas about generosity and justice. And we want to ask why his legacy is still so incredibly powerful today. I mean, you have leaders from Nasser to modern activists still invoking his name.
It's a massive topic. And to guide us, we've got a really solid stack of sources. We're looking at the classic biography by his contemporary and personal advisor, Ibn Shaddad.
That one is invaluable.
Oh, it's pure gold. Because Ibn Shaddad was literally in the tent with him. He saw him cry, he saw him pray, he saw him exhausted and ill. It's an eyewitness account.
It's not propaganda written 100 years later.
No. Then we have modern, very extensive analyses by Dr. Ali Salabi, which really dig into the religious and strategic dimensions, the software behind the military hardware, if you will. And we're balancing all of that with some key Western historical perspectives from Jonathan Phillips and John Mann, just to make sure we aren't just reading a eulogy, but a full spectrum history.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock. We are looking at the year 1137 or 1138 CE. We were in Tikrit, in modern Iraq. And the story starts, well, it starts with a bit of a crisis, doesn't it?
It does. The timing is almost cinematic. It feels like the opening scene of a great historical drama. Salahuddin is born on the very night his entire family is being exiled from the city.
Talk about an entrance.
Right. His father, Chivalry Ayyubi, and his uncle, the famous warrior Shirkuh, are Kurdish soldiers. They aren't royalty. They're military men, governors in the service of the powerful Zengid dynasty. But because of a violent altercation involving his uncle, it was essentially an honor killing, where Shirkuh defended a woman's honor against a local official. They had to flee Tikrit under the cover of darkness.
So born on the run, born into a military family, born right in the middle of the political crisis,
Yeah.
you would assume from that start that he was destined for the sword. A little Spartan warrior from day one, training in the yard with a wooden sword.
And that is where the first big surprise of his life story hits us. The sources, and Dr. Salabi's work really highlights this, show that the young Yusuf Salahuddin was actually a reluctant soldier.
He didn't want to do it.
By all accounts, he was far more interested in theology and academia than in warfare. He grew up in Damascus, which at that time was a thriving cosmopolitan center of culture and learning, and he was an intellectual.
He was a nerd.
In the best possible way, yes. He loved his books. He studied the Quran. He studied Hadith, which are the traditions of the Prophet. He studied jurisprudence, or fiqh, and lineage, nasab. He was shaping up to be a scholar or a high-level bureaucrat. He loved poetry. He loved theological debate. The military life was not his first choice.
This is a really crucial point, I think, because usually when we think of the great conquerors in history, we think of Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan, people who seem almost obsessed with conquest for its own sake. They just want to paint the map their color.
Right. It's about personal glory or dynastic ambition.
But Salahuddin's foundation was religious text. How does that change the way he eventually leads an army?
It changes absolutely everything about how he fought and why he fought. He didn't view war as a means to acquire territory for his own personal glory. Because of that deep educational foundation, he viewed warfare through the specific lens of jihad.
Now, we should define that term carefully because it's probably one of the most misunderstood words in the world today.
It is. And for Salahuddin, based on his classical Sunni studies, this was understood specifically as a defensive moral obligation. It was a duty to protect the Ummah, the community of believers, from an external existential threat. He wasn't trying to build a new empire for the Ayyubid family. He was trying to secure the safety of the faithful. It meant that war was a heavy burden, a solemn duty, not a sport for kings.
So he's not painting the map. He's looking at this as a sacred responsibility. But he didn't just come up with this idea in a vacuum. We have to talk about the man who really shaped this entire worldview. Because Salahuddin had a mentor.
Nur-ad-Din Zangi. You simply cannot understand Salahuddin without understanding Nur-ad-Din. He was the ruler of Syria, and he was really the architect of what we might call the Counter-Crusade.
Counter-Crusade, I like that term. It implies that what was happening in the Muslim world at that time was a reaction. It was an awakening.
Exactly. For a long time after the First Crusade in 1099, the Muslim world was completely fragmented. It was a total mess of competing city-states, Aleppo, Damascus, Mosul, all fighting amongst themselves. They were often making alliances with the Crusaders against each other. It was pure, cynical, realpolitik.
So there was no unified front.
None whatsoever. Nur ad-Din was the one who changed the entire narrative. He possessed this powerful vision that victory wouldn't come from just having a bigger army or better swords. It would come from spiritual renewal and political unity first. He believed you had to unite the Muslim lands, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, before you could ever even dream of retaking Jerusalem.
And Salahuddin is there watching this. He's learning at the feet of this master strategist. He's seeing firsthand that unity is the absolute prerequisite for any kind of victory. And then destiny comes knocking.
Or rather, his uncle Shirkuh comes knocking and basically drags him to Egypt.
Right. It's one of the great what-ifs of history.
Yeah.
Salahuddin reportedly did not want to go.
He loved Damascus. He loved his studies, his quiet life. He famously said, "I went to Egypt like a man being led to his death. He had to be compelled to go." But he goes as a deputy, an officer under his uncle's command. And Egypt at this time in the 1160s was a complete mess. It was the sick man of the region.
Give us the lay of the land in Egypt. Why was it such a mess? Because Egypt is usually the regional powerhouse, the breadbasket.
It should have been, but it was ruled by the Fatimid Caliphate. Now, this is a really important detail. The Fatimids were Shia Muslims. The majority of the population in the broader region, and Nur ad-Din himself, were Sunni. So you had this deep sectarian divide right at the heart of the state.
And the state itself was weak.
It was crumbling. The Fatimid caliphs were basically puppets, children locked away in their lavish palaces in Cairo, while their viziers were literally fighting each other for control in the streets. It was completely unstable, and the Crusaders were knocking on the door, trying to take Cairo.
They knew it was the prize.
King Alaric of Jerusalem knew that if he could take Egypt, the Crusader kingdom would be financially secure and strategically invincible. It was the key to the whole region.
So you have this young, scholarly Sunni Kurd from Damascus who finds himself dropped right into the snake pit of Shia Egyptian politics. And then in the blink of an eye, his powerful uncle Shirkuh dies suddenly, and Salahuddin's left holding the bag. He becomes the vizier.
And this is where the scholar shows his political genius. He is a Sunni vizier, serving as Shia caliph, in a country that's ripe for a Crusader invasion. Most people, especially the Fatimid court officials, thought he would last a few weeks. They called him the jobless initially, mocking his lack of experience. They thought he was weak, someone they could easily manipulate.
They underestimated him.
Massively. Instead of being their puppet, he orchestrates one of the most significant and peaceful strategic shifts in medieval history. In the year 1171, he effectively ends the Fatimid Caliphate.
He just turns off the lights on a 200-year-old empire. How on earth do you do that without triggering a massive civil war?
Through a masterclass in soft power and impeccable timing. He spent a couple of years slowly and carefully consolidating his control over the military. He won the loyalty of the troops. Then, when the time was right, he simply ordered that the Friday prayers, the most important public declaration of sovereignty, be read in the name of the Sunni Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, instead of the Fatimid Caliph in Cairo.
And what happened?
Almost nothing. The Fatimid Caliph himself was ill and died shortly after, and just like that, Egypt was peacefully brought back into the Sunni fold. There was no bloodbath, no burning of the city, just a quiet, decisive political shift.
But this brings us to the next critical phase, what the sources call the Sunni revival. Because as Dr. Salabi argues, this wasn't just a change of flags. It wasn't just, okay, now we answer to Baghdad instead of Cairo. This was a complete educational and social overhaul.
This is the part that often gets skipped in Western histories, but it's absolutely vital to understanding his later success. Salahuddin didn't just build forts, he built schools. Specifically, he established madrasas.
Define a madrasa for us in this 12th century context. It's not just a primary school, is it?
No, not at all. Think of it as a college of law and theology. But for Salahuddin, it was something more. It was an ideological factory. He understood on a deep level that you cannot fight a determined external enemy like the Crusaders if your internal population is ideologically fractured and confused.
You need everyone on the same page.
Exactly. He established these schools to teach Sharia and Orthodox Sunni theology to create a unified class of administrators, judges, and scholars. He wanted unity of belief as the necessary precursor to unity of action.
It's playing the long game. He's not just thinking about the next battle, he's thinking about the next generation. He's rewiring the software of the entire society.
The longest game. And he funded this through a brilliant system called walk pious endowments. He would set aside land or businesses, and all their future profits would be legally bound to perpetually fund these schools and hospitals.
So they were self-sustaining?
Yes. It meant the education system wasn't dependent on the whims of the next ruler or the state budget. It was an institution designed to outlive him. This created a layer of society that was loyal to the ideal of the state, not just to the man in charge.
And he paired this educational reform with social and economic reforms that honestly seem almost counterintuitive for a guy who knows he's preparing for a massive war. He abolished the mucus. What was that?
The mucus were a whole series of non-canonical, basically illegal taxes. Think of them as market taxes, road tolls, pilgrimage taxes. They were a huge burden on the poor and the merchant class, but they were also a massive source of revenue for the state, especially under the late Fatimids.
Okay, wait, let's just pause there. He is preparing for a generation-defining war against the combined might of the Crusader states. He needs money for weapons, for horses, for fortifications, for mercenaries, and his first major economic move is to cut his own revenue streams. That sounds like financial suicide.
It defies all conventional economic logic, doesn't it? If you were playing a strategy game like Civilization or Total War, you would raise taxes to build armies. But this is where you really have to understand Salahuddin's worldview, his operating system. He believed in the concept of baraka.
Which means blessings.
Right, blessings from God. He genuinely believed that if he established justice and removed oppression, like these illegal taxes, then God would provide the victory and the prosperity. He believed that taking dirty money taken unjustly from the poor, would literally curse his army and his efforts.
That is a massive, massive gamble. It's a leap of faith, not an economic policy. Did it actually work in practical terms?
Practically speaking, yes, it was a stunning success. It immediately won him the hearts of the common people and the powerful merchant class. And the economy actually flourished because with those taxes gone, trade increased. Merchants and caravans started flocking to Egypt because it was essentially a tax-friendly zone. The sources all say the people loved him for it.
So he's building his popular support from the ground up.
He's building infrastructure, hospitals, dikes for the Nile, massive fortifications like the Cairo Citadel, all while technically reducing his tax base. He was betting everything on this one core idea that justice strengthens a state more than gold ever could.
Which leads us perfectly into the man's philosophy of power. We've established he's a brilliant strategist and a social reformer. But what was he actually like? As a leader, as a person? Because the sources, especially Ibn Shaddad's eyewitness account, paint a picture of someone who was, well, almost too nice to be a king.
There's a famous quote that sums it up perfectly. It was said by his contemporaries that this man did not conquer lands with his swords, but with the pen of Qadi al-Fadil.
Qadi al-Fadil, he was his legendary advisor, his chancellor, right?
His chief of staff. A brilliant writer, administrator, and strategist in his own right. And that quote highlights that Salahuddin relied heavily on the pen, on diplomacy, on propaganda, on carefully worded letters, on intellect. The chancery, the Diwan el-Insha, was the engine room of his state. He wasn't a brute who just solved every problem with force.
But that point about him being too nice, his generosity was apparently legendary, to the point of being a logistical problem for his own government.
A huge problem for his treasurer. I read that he often gave away so much wealth to petitioners, soldiers, and scholars that he literally had to borrow money to equip his own army for major campaigns. That just sounds irresponsible to a modern ear.
It does. How do you run a government like that?
To us, maybe it seems that way. But to him, wealth was just dust, as he famously called it. He saw money purely as a tool to bind people together, to create loyalty and goodwill. Think about the feudal system of the time. Mercenaries fight for pay. They will desert you the second the money runs out, or someone offers them more.
Right. Their loyalty is transactional.
Exactly. Salahuddin's emirs, his commanders, they fought for him because he genuinely cared for them, he enriched them, and he treated them with immense respect and generosity. It created a powerful personal loyalty that money literally cannot buy. There's a famous story where he gave a visiting emir literally everything in his treasury, and when the treasurer came to him in a panic and said, "My lord, we have nothing left for the emergency fund," Salahuddin basically just said, "God will provide."
And then there's the justice aspect. You read about these mausoleum courts. How did those work?
So mausoleum means grievances. He held a public court, an open session, twice a week, usually on Mondays and Thursdays. And Anyone, a commoner, a peasant, a merchant, a widow could come and bring a grievance directly against any state official.
Any official, even his top generals.
Anyone. And the sources tell this one incredible anecdote that just perfectly illustrates his philosophy. A man actually brought a lawsuit against Salahuddin himself.
Against the Sultan, the absolute ruler of the empire.
Yes. The man claimed that Salahuddin had taken his property unfairly. Specifically, a slave named Sunkor, who the man claimed belonged to him. Now, just imagine the scenario in medieval Europe. If a peasant sued the King of England or France, he'd most likely lose his head or be laughed out of court.
Unthinkable.
But instead, Salahuddin descended from his throne, walked down, and stood side by side with his accuser in front of the judge, the Qadi. He submitted himself to the law, treating the man as a complete equal in the eyes of the court.
That's wild. What was the verdict? Who won the case?
Salahuddin produced witnesses and documents and proved that the slave was legally his. He won the case fair and square. But then, immediately after the verdict was read, he freed the slave and gave him to the man as a gift, along with a robe of honor and some money.
That is masterful. It's a political masterstroke.
It is. It proves that the law is above the Sultan, but then it immediately shows that the Sultan's generosity is above the law. It sent a shockwave through the society. It was powerful branding, for sure, but it was also rooted in his genuine piety.
Let's talk about that, because Ibn Shaddad writes about it constantly.
He does. He writes that Salahuddin never missed a prayer, even when he was terribly sick, even in the heat and chaos of a battle. He loved hearing the Quran recited. He would weep openly when he heard particularly emotional verses. His contemporaries were clear. This was not a performance for the public. This was his fuel. He truly believed that victory came from God, not from his own tactical genius. He believed that his personal piety was the engine of his success.
Okay, so we have this pious, generous, justice-obsessed scholar warrior. He's secured Egypt, he's reformed its society, but the big prize, or rather the big responsibility, is Jerusalem. But he doesn't just march straight for Jerusalem, does he?
No, and this brings us to his grand strategy. And this is the part that frustrated many of his more hot-headed contemporaries. He spent years, a decade even, fighting other Muslims.
This is the unifying the front phase of his career.
Exactly. He spent years bringing Damascus, Aleppo, and Mosul under his banner. The sources tell us he hated fighting other Muslims. He always tried to negotiate first, offering incredibly generous terms. But he knew the strategic logic was absolutely undeniable. You cannot take and hold Jerusalem if you don't control the hinterland. If he took Jerusalem while Mosul was still an enemy at his back, he'd be crushed from behind in a matter of months. He needed a unified command structure.
So he's painstakingly stitching the map together, piece by piece.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Crusaders and the Kingdom of Jerusalem are watching this giant, unified superstate form all around them. They are surrounded.
Yeah.
And things are getting tense.
The Kingdom of Jerusalem is getting very, very nervous. But they have their own internal problems. The Crusader kingdom is deeply fractured. You have the hawks, the warmongers who want war and expansion at any cost. And you have the doves, the local lords who've been there for generations and want to coexist and trade.
And the biggest hawk of all was a man named Reynold of Châtillon.
This guy, I mean, every story needs a villain, and Reynold really leans into the role. He's like a cartoon bad guy, but real.
What was his deal?
He was a rogue lord, the Prince of Antioch, and Lord of Ultra-Jourdain. There's a binding legal truce in place between Salahuddin and the Crusader king of Jerusalem, Guy of Lusignan. A formal truce. But Reynold didn't care. He was attacking rich pilgrim and trade caravans going to Mecca, breaking the truce with impunity. He was capturing civilians for ransom. He was basically just poking the bear. There are even reports he threatened to march on the holy city of Mecca itself.
And that was the provocation Salahuddin needed, or perhaps the one he was waiting for.
It was the absolute breaking point. Salahuddin had sworn a public vow that he would punish Reynold with his own hand for these crimes. The truce was shattered, the armies were mobilized on both sides, and it all converged on a place in Galilee called Hattin.
July of 1187, the Battle of Hattin. This is the big one. This is the showdown. But this wasn't just about swords and shields. The environment itself played a huge role here.
It's a masterclass in tactical brilliance and using the terrain to your advantage. Salahuddin lured the entire Crusader field army out of their well-watered fortifications near a place called Sephoria. He did this by laying siege to a town called Tiberias, which was held by one of the Crusader lords. He baited them.
And the Crusader Council was split on whether to go, right? Some of them said, don't go, it's an obvious trap.
Yes, a lord named Raymond of Tripoli argued passionately against it. He said, let Tiberias fall, we can retake it later. Do not march the army into the desert in the middle of summer. But the Hawks, led by Reynold and the Grand Master of the Templars, called him a coward. They questioned his loyalty. So King Guy, who was a bit weak-willed, caved to the pressure and ordered the march.
A fatal mistake.
A death march. It was the height of summer. We were talking about the Galilee in July. Scorching, relentless heat.
And Salahuddin did something very simple, but utterly devastating.
He controlled the water. He positioned his army between the marching crusaders and their only destination, the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Tiberias. So you have the entire Crusader army, tens of thousands of men wearing heavy chainmail and wool padding, marching across an arid, dusty plateau, completely dehydrated, being harassed by horse archers the whole way.
And then Salahuddin lights the fires.
Psychological and physical warfare all at once. He had his men set fire to the dry scrub and grass upwind of the Crusader army. So now they are thirsty, they're exhausted, they are hot, and they are choking on thick, acrid smoke. And all through the night, the Muslim army is banging drums, chanting, keeping them awake, adding to the terror. By the time the battle actually started the next morning, the Crusaders were already defeated by the elements.
The result was the total and complete destruction of the Kingdom of Jerusalem's field army.
Complete. The flower of Crusader chivalry was either wiped out on the field or captured. The king himself, Guy Lusignan, was captured, Reynold of Châtillon was captured, and most significantly for the morale of the Christian world, the true cross, their most holy relic, which they always brought into battle, was captured.
There's this incredibly famous scene after the battle. It takes place in Salahuddin's tent. You have Salahuddin, the captive King Guy, and the villain, Reynold. It unfolds almost like a play.
It's a perfect study in the nuances of Arab hospitality and Islamic justice. Salahuddin is sitting there. He orders a golden cup of iced water snow brought down from Mount Hermon to be given to King Guy, who is gasping with thirst. Now, this is a clear signal. In the custom of the time, Munakasha, if a prisoner is given food or drink by his captor, his life is considered safe. It's a bond of honor.
So King Guy drinks, breathes this huge sigh of relief, and then he naturally passes the cup to his fellow captive, Reynold.
And Salahuddin immediately interjects. He says, through an interpreter, "You did not ask my permission to give that man water. Therefore, my hospitality does not extend to him."
Chilling. That's a death sentence right there.
It is. He then calmly confronts Reynold with his crimes, the attacks on the pilgrims, the breaking of the truce, the blasphemy against the prophet, and he fulfills his public vow. Reynold is executed, but King Guy is spared and treated with honor. It was a message to the world. Salahuddin could be merciful to an honorable enemy, but he would be ruthless to a treacherous one.
With the Crusader army completely gone, the road to Jerusalem is wide open. October 1187. The liberation. And I want to pause here because the historical context is absolutely vital. We have to look back 88 years to 1099.
Yes. When the soldiers of the First Crusade took Jerusalem from the Fatimids, it was a horror show.
It was a bloodbath. The Latin sources themselves admit this. In fact, they bragged about it. Crusaders wrote home about riding in blood up to their knees. The Muslim and Jewish population of the city was systematically massacred. Men, women, children seeking refuge in the mosques and synagogues were slaughtered without mercy. It was one of the darkest moments in medieval history. So fast forward to 1187. The Christian population inside Jerusalem is terrified. They know their own history. They're expecting payback. They're expecting the sword.
And this is the moment where Salahuddin becomes a legend, not just in the East, but in the West as well, because he does the exact opposite. He grants amnesty.
Just like that. No revenge killings, no massacres.
He negotiated a surrender. He allowed those who could pay a small ransom to leave the city safely with their possessions. But here is the kicker. There were thousands of poor people who couldn't afford to pay even that small ransom. So what did Salahuddin do? He, his brother Salahuddin, and his emirs paid the ransoms for thousands of them out of their own pockets, or in many cases simply declared them free to go for the sake of God.
He just let them go.
He let them go. He said he did not want to stain the holiness of the sacred city with blood. He immediately set about restoring the Dome of the Rock and cleaning the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Templars had been using as a headquarters and a stable for their horses. It was a conquest of purification, not vengeance. And he allowed the Eastern Christians, the Orthodox, the Copts, to stay and worship freely.
And there's that beautiful symbolic detail about the minbar, the pulpit.
Yes, you have to remember his mentor, Nur ad-Din. Decades earlier, Nur ad-Din had commissioned a magnificent, intricately carved wooden minbar to be built in Aleppo by the finest craftsmen of the age. It took years to make, and he told everyone, "This is for the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem."
People must have thought he was crazy.
They did. Jerusalem was firmly in Crusader hands. It seemed like a pipe dream. But that beautiful minbar sat in a mosque in Aleppo for years, just waiting. And when Salahuddin took the city, one of the first things he did was order that minbar to be brought all the way from Aleppo and installed in its rightful place in Al-Aqsa. He fulfilled his mentor's dream. It was such a powerful symbol of continuity, faith, and the culmination of a generation-long project.
That is genuinely poetic. It connects the generations. But the story doesn't end with a happily ever after. Europe didn't just shrug and say, oh, well, we lost Jerusalem.
No. The news hit Europe like a thunderclap. The Pope reportedly died of shock when he heard it, and Europe mobilized for what became known as the Third Crusade. And this was the all-star team, the A-team of European royalty. You had Philip II of France, you had the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, though he famously drowned in a river on the way, and of course you had Richard the Lionheart of England.
Richard and Saladin is one of history's great legendary rivalries. But this was a different kind of war. This wasn't a tactical trap like Hatton. This was a brutal grind.
It was a brutal war of attrition. The Third Crusade was effectively a stalemate. Richard was a brilliant military tactician, probably one of the best of his era. He actually defeated Salahuddin in a major open-field battle, the Battle of Arsuf, because his heavy infantry and crossbowmen were disciplined enough to withstand the classic Turkish horse archer tactics.
So Salahuddin couldn't just beat him on the field.
Not easily. So he played a different game. He played a war of attrition. He knew Richard had a long, long supply line. He knew Richard had a kingdom back in England that needed him. His brother John was trying to usurp the throne. So Salahuddin just kept his army together, which was a miracle in itself, given how exhausted they were after years of nonstop fighting, and he just outlasted him.
But amidst all this brutal fighting, there are these bizarre, almost surreal moments of mutual respect that the sources on both sides highlight.
The chivalry aspect. It's fascinating. When Richard fell ill with a fever near Jaffa, the sources say Salahuddin sent him fresh fruit and, incredibly, snow and ice from the mountains to cool his fever. When Richard's horse was killed under him in a battle, Salahuddin sent him 2 fresh Arabian horses, saying it was not right for a great king to have to fight on foot.
It sounds like something out of a romance novel, but it's in the Chronicles. Why would you do that for an enemy who is actively trying to kill you and take your most important city?
I think it goes back to his fundamental character. He respected bravery and strength even in an enemy, and he understood that honor was a currency. By treating Richard with such high honor, he elevated his own status. It also showed he wasn't afraid. Generosity from a position of power is a show of ultimate strength. Eventually, they hammered out the Treaty of Ramla in 1192.
What were the final terms?
Yeah. Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands. That was the absolute non-negotiable for Salahuddin. But unarmed Christian pilgrims would be allowed to visit the holy sites freely and safely. In the end, it was a diplomatic victory for Salahuddin. He had defended the city against the combined might of Europe.
And then, almost anticlimactically, he dies. The year is 1193. He's back in his beloved Damascus. The Crusaders have gone home, and the great Sultan passes away from a fever.
And this leads to the final and perhaps most shocking detail of his entire life. When his officials went to open his personal treasury to pay for his funeral, and remember, this is the emperor of the Middle East, the ruler of an empire stretching from the Tigris to the Nile, they found almost nothing.
The sources say it was 47 silver dirhams and 1 single gold piece.
Not even enough money to pay for his burial shroud. He had to be buried in a shroud that was provided on credit by his secretary. He had given every last coin away, to the poor, to his soldiers, to scholars, to Sufi mystics, to anyone who asked him for help.
The lesson was clear. The ruler who conquered lands has left this world with nothing.
That's the lesson. He left no lasting dynasty. He built no grand palaces for himself. He left a reputation, an idea.
So let's pivot to that legacy, because Salahuddin didn't just stay in the 12th century. He is very, very much alive in the modern political imagination.
Oh, absolutely. It's what some scholars call the Saladin complex. In the modern Middle East, especially in the 20th and 21st centuries, political leaders have constantly tried to drape themselves in his mantle.
Who are we talking about here? Give us some examples.
Well, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt promoted films and stories about Saladin to emphasize the theme of Arab unity against Western imperialism. Hafez al-Assad in Syria commissioned statues and huge paintings linking himself directly to Salahuddin. Saddam Hussein, who was also born in Tikrit. In fact, he never, ever let anyone forget, obsessively linked himself to Saladin as the great unifier and the future liberator of Jerusalem. Even more recently, Erdogan in Turkey often uses the rhetoric of Saladin to appeal to a sense of Islamic solidarity.
It's a very powerful symbol. If you want to present yourself as the great unifier, you have to be the new Saladin. But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is. There's a fascinating pop culture reference in the Phillips source regarding President Barack Obama.
Oh, right. The Egyptian rap artist?
Well, a popular Shabi folk singer named Shaban Abdel Rahim. When Obama was first elected, there was this huge wave of hope across the Middle East. And this singer released a song that was basically a warning to Obama. He said, essentially, don't let people compare you to Saladin. The idea being that Saladin is this ultimate savior figure, a bar so high that any modern politician, especially an American president, could never possibly live up to it. It shows how protective the culture is of Saladin's almost sacred image.
And in the West, the fascination just never ended. We mentioned Dante. Sir Walter Scott wrote his novel The Talisman, which basically cemented the image of the chivalrous noble Saladin in the Victorian mind for generations.
The West, in a way, needed him to be chivalrous. It validated their own code. Think about it. If your enemy is just a mindless barbarian, then fighting him is just pest control. There's no honor in it. But if your enemy is noble, perhaps even nobler than your own kings, then the crusade becomes a tragic, romantic, high-stakes drama. He validated the crusader's own self-image by being the perfect, worthy opponent.
So we've unpacked the history, the man, the legacy. Let's do the analysis. What does all of this mean for us, for the learner listening to this today? What is the formula for revival that Dr. Salahuddin talks about in his work?
This is the critical takeaway, I think. Salahuddin argues very forcefully that Salahuddin's success wasn't an accident or just about one charismatic guy showing up at the right time. He argues it followed a clear, repeatable formula. Step 1, a return to core beliefs, a spiritual and educational cleanup. You have to fix the software of the society first.
So it starts with ideas.
It starts with ideas. Step 2, unity of the internal front. You cannot possibly fight a major external battle if you are engaged in an internal civil war. You have to stop the infighting. Step 3, preparation. That means economic, military, and crucially, educational preparation. Building the institutions, the madrasas, the hospitals, the fortresses.
And the final step.
Step 4, justice. Establishing a state where the common man feels protected and valued so that he wants to defend it, it creates buy-in from the entire population.
It's a roadmap. It's not just a magical formula of wait for a hero to appear.
Exactly. And for anyone listening today, the leadership lesson is profound. True authority in the Salahuddin model comes from service and from character, not just from coercive power. He didn't force loyalty. He inspired it through his actions.
And the strategic lesson seems to be patience.
Patience, long-term goals. We live in a world that is obsessed with quarterly results and instant gratification. Salahuddin thought in terms of decades. He spent 20 years just uniting Syria before he even made his final move on Jerusalem. He built the schools before he fought the decisive battles.
That brings us to a really provocative question for the future then. The sources mention that the Muslim world, in times of crisis, is often looking for a new Saladin. We see this in the political rhetoric we just discussed. But based on this formula, is that even the right thing to look for?
That is the what's next thought, isn't it? The expert analysis in these sources suggests that waiting for a single savior to arrive is actually a trap. The material implies that you don't need the man so much as you need the institutions and values that he built. You need the justice system, the education system, the internal unity. If you build those things first, the right kind of leader will emerge naturally from that system. If you don't have those things, even a new Salahuddin would probably fail.
So it's not about finding a Superman. It's about building the superstructure that allows good leaders to thrive.
Exactly. Victory, according to these sources, follows what they call the laws of cause and effect. It's not magic, it's a process. It's preparation.
Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground, from the dramatic exile in Tikrit to the throne of Egypt, from the scorching heat of Hattin to the gift of ice water in the victor's tent.
Yeah.
We've seen the scholar, the unifier, the victor, and finally the ascetic who died completely penniless.
It is a life that absolutely demands study. A remarkable figure.
I want to leave you, the listener, with this final thought, something to really mull over. Salahuddin defeated the Crusaders on the battlefield, yes. But the sources strongly suggest he really defeated them by out-moralizing them. He held up a mirror to their own stated ideals of chivalry and showed them what those ideals actually looked like in practice.
He won the moral high ground.
He did. So in today's world of cynical realpolitik, where we are constantly told that nice guys finish last and that you have to be ruthless to survive, can a leader actually succeed by emptying their treasury for the poor and forgiving their mortal enemies? Or was Salahuddin just a unique, unrepeatable glitch in the matrix of history?
That is the question, isn't it? Was he the rule or was he the once-in-a-millennium exception?
Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.